National. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Parce que ce qui nous anime, ce qui nous transcende, ce qui nous fait porter la réassurance aux frontières du possible et au-delà, notre mission, notre vision, nos valeurs, c'est ce que l'on a de plus précieux, notre monde. Et si nous bâtissions ce monde uni pour un futur plus prospère, positif, radieux, responsable, généreux, altruiste, sûr, si nous marquions le monde de demain de notre empreinte, créateurs de résilience depuis 1960, nous avons une vision, devenir la référence de la réassurance dans les marchés émergents. Depuis notre création, nous tirons vers le haut notre ambition pour répondre aux exigences de nos clients et partenaires au Maroc et à l'international. Leader de la réassurance au Maroc, nous marquons de notre empreinte l'économie nationale en jouant un rôle central dans l'écosystème de l'assurance et de la réassurance au niveau national et régional, et en étant une institution financière solide, bénéficiant d'un excellent rating. Opérant dans plus de 50 marchés avec plus de 300 clients, nous mettons en avant notre savoir-faire, notre expertise afin d'offrir à nos clients et partenaires la meilleure prestation. Nous visons à être inspirés et inspirants, à partager notre savoir-faire, à accompagner de par le monde à travers la fondation SCR Académie Ré, les idées qui viennent d'éclore vers le chemin des réalisations dont nous sommes si fiers. SCR, créateur de résilience depuis 1960.
10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
Mesdames, Messieurs, Ladies and gentlemen, good morning and welcome to this last afternoon session of the Casablanca Insurance meeting. Before going into the topic, I'd like to thank the Moroccan Federation of Insurance and Reinsurers for holding this meeting and for its resilience as this meeting is unfolding in the context that you all know. I'd like to pay tribute to the creativity of the technical team as we are in hybrid, distance and remote and in presence and attendance. And I'd like to also recall that this meeting, Casablanca meeting, is taking place by a turmoil challenged by the pandemic that really compelled the insurance world and sector to adapt through new channels and sales channels like the digital that has been imposed with strength in 2020. It has almost invaded us, readapt and readjust through the coverage of new risks like a world disease that we haven't experienced for several decades and readapt through a new customer base to be broadened and expanded. And we have discovered in this pandemic world that a lot of people were not covered by negligence, by lack of knowledge of insurance products. So we're talking here about inclusion. And this is precisely the theme of our meeting this year as we're all talking about insurance inclusion and resilience to the pandemic. And this is a question that we as insurance companies, enterprise world are posing ourselves. So some questions are naive and some are really technical. So let me share some one of them. So to what extent the insurance can actually cover us in case of pandemic, and what are the guarantees when I buy insurance on internet? Is the cost of my insurance going to be rising? I'm talking about fund of natural disasters insurance and coverage. So therefore, the cost of insurance has increased for companies and enterprises. Another question: to what extent goes the insurance from the insurance to the reinsured, etc.? And when the risk arises, who pays what and who pays for who? And all these topics have been addressed during yesterday's session from different angles and perspectives, and they will be also addressed this afternoon from different angles with a prestigious panelists and keynote speakers. Before giving the floor, I'd like to call to my side Mr. Bashir Badou, the Managing Director of the Federation of Insurance and Reinsurance. He is the organizer of this major events. So how was your day, Mr. Badou? Very good day. Beautiful opening ceremony. We had the pleasure to have the Minister of Finance, the Governor of the Central Bank, and of course the President of the governance, the minister, the governor of the central bank, and so a panel that was very rich and prestigious, as prestigious as the guests. This is at the high level of expectancy of the Casablanca insurance meeting. So you are also an insurance company and the leader of insurance companies way before being the president. So if you were to resume the future. So what future for the insurance world in a world in motion? And Mr. Attali is going to talk about it, and I would like to warmly thank Mr. Attali on behalf of the Moroccan Federation of Insurance and Reinsurers. He's been so kind and doing us the friendship to honor us with his presence. And I know that a lot of insurance companies that I have been exchanging with are looking forward to hear him and listen to him. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go.
Quel avenir pour l'assurance dans un monde en profonde mutation?
Alors, bienvenue à cette session qui
So welcome to this keynote speakers session with the theme, What Future for the Insurance in a World of Major Changes and Motion. Good morning. I'm so sorry for not being in attendance with you. I have such a nostalgia for Morocco, and I'm so homesick for Morocco, and I have such a great friendship for Morocco. I would have loved to be with you to feel and smell the flavors of Morocco that I cherish so much. Mr. Atali, you spoke about the mutations and changes in the insurance world. I'd like to introduce Mr. Atali, but he's not to be introduced. He's a thinker, philosopher, writer, novelist, and economist. Mr. Atali is very well known and globally known, and we'd like to thank him for taking some time and his time for being with us. I'd like to reiterate to Mr. Atali our greatest thanks and heartfelt thanks for being with us, for honoring us with his presence. I spoke to him a couple of weeks ago, and as I told him, we will be pleasured and pleased to welcome him in Casablanca physically anytime soon. So I will leave you in the hands of Mr. Fadel. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. The insurance sector is very close to my heart, but because for years I always believed it is a central element and sector, not only for the finance and economy, but for human history. So going back to the insurance history is passionating. Insurance goes back to the ages and going back to long-standing societies that have been in common with risk management. If we were to give a definition of a society, each society is legitimized by an insurance process, insurance giving to its vassals that in exchange will give him the power and giving back to him a certain form of protection. So insurance will come up with the best means to protect against potential risks. And if I may, I'd like to go out of the insurance world to talk about the current situation and come back later on to what it is that the insurance can bring and how it can be impacted by the current changes. The current crisis will tell us so much about insurance. It will relate the insurance to its first rank and also show us some of its limitations. And earlier on, by the way, you spoke about the fact that many people found out during this crisis that the insurance cannot be everything, but insurance is actually pooling risks. And when everyone is covered and challenged by the same risk, the insurance cannot cover it all. You can be actually asking the big question, coming back to the fundamental question that is posed, should be posed in the future debates between the insurance world. So the crisis that we are in is not coming to the end and is far from being finished and will bring about a lot of implications and changes. It is still here and it is not finished yet, despite the fact that vaccines are available. And even if they were, and when they will be in a couple of months and even beyond, it will still be a challenge. And I would like to say that even if all vaccines were available for everyone in Morocco, in India, in Europe, and all over the globe, it would not be enough because, and you are better suited to know that me than me, there are a lot of collateral and material damage and sustainable damage, non-cure diseases, breakdowns, and companies that have closed down, lots of collateral damage to manage stemming from the pandemic. And secondly, because vaccines might, and we don't know yet, would not maybe be able to protect against all variants. So we should get prepared that other variants will prepare for which will come up for which we're not prepared. And because this crisis will remind us that it was predictable. And I am one of those who are saying pandemics are possible. And we have been voicing out that pandemics are there and we should get ready and prepared to it. And Actually, the Asians actually, 54 million of inhabitants, they had 7,800 dead, but this country actually was very prepared. But with or without vaccine, we need a much better management of the pandemic, and we could have done it before or better if we were prepared. So for future pandemic, we should be aware that this poses a question of future damages that could occur and future threats that are as foreseeable and predictable as the current pandemic, on which that we're not acting enough. Of course, we all keep in mind the question of global warming and climate warming, and we have evidence of it every day. We have data saying that the cherries of Japan and blooming of the cherries of Japan has never been as early for the last 800 years than it has been this year. And still, and yet we're not doing enough to prevent, but not only on nature, but on water scarcity, the challenge on biodiversity or end of biodiversity, invasions of mosquitoes and other kinds of birds. And you know that Morocco has been challenged by that. So all this is predictable, is known, and we know what to do to stop it, but we haven't done it, like for the pandemic. And if pandemics are reversible, or relatively reversible, so they can be stopped. And I spoke about some pandemic that are reversible, but unfortunately we had a lot of deaths. But there is still a form of reversibility, but it's not the case. So for other threats that I spoke about, they are not threats that are at the scope with the level of a vaccine. There will not be a vaccine against global warming or climate change, against water scarcity, or vaccines against other type of birds invasions or such as invasions. In order to prevent this, we need to come up with a totally radical attitude. And you will see that the insurance world has to play a role. We need to realize that this model has to be changed radically. We have to go to a live economy and a positive society that is working in the best interest of future generations. So all what we do doesn't make sense if we do not protect future generations. And this is a way to go forward. And this is only the thing that positive societies should do. A society that has understood that the present is impacted by the future and not only by the past. Of course, I said that it was impacted by the past because of past challenges, but the present is impacted by the future. If you do not work to preserve current life from the future will be impacted. So we have to work in the best interest of future generations. So we want the future generations to be able to work, to fund our pension funds, to have doctors that will replace those who will retire. So with better work in the best interest of future generations. And for that, this concept of positive societies is displayed and implemented in a series of economic sectors. So it goes without saying that fossil energies is contrary to the best interest of future generations from the climate standpoint, but also from all other standpoints. So for fossil energies, plastics, or to produce other products should be very quickly and largely replaced by renewables. And other sectors, what we call live economy sectors that only account for half of the world population, and that should become at the very core of the economic and social and political concern. Health, education, agriculture, insurance, finance, inclusive finance, long-term and sustainable housing, clean energies and sustainable energy, security, democracy, peace, and stability. So there are about 12 arguments and principles that's the long-standing and positive society is based on. Insurance is part and parcel of the scheme. It is at the very heart of this whole reflection and the protection of societies, because it is vital for the most vulnerable groups and poorest groups. As you know, in Morocco, the poorest groups are the most threatened by collateral damage. The poorest is a person, the more vulnerable he will become. If you work in the microfinance, you would know it. If someone is not covered by a micro insurance, a small business that will he will create will vanish, and the large companies also. So insurance is absolutely vital to fight extreme poverty and keep people from extreme vulnerability. And then insurance will fall or will be enshrined in a change and mutation process. It is much more important and necessary and rational now more than ever to go towards prevention than reparation or repair of the damage. It will cost much less to prevent or to predict a pandemic like the South Koreans did than really repair the damage. It will be more affordable to protect ourselves and to predict a climate change than adapting to this climate change. So I think we're moving towards a society where the prevention will be the key word. Even in medicine, we move towards a preventive medicine that will be or will become a predictive type, a preventive type of medicine that will take over the repair or curing medicine. Of course, we will have to compensate the damages, but it will become at the very heart of future medicine, the preventive medicine. So all topics are around and circumvent about on prevention. Vaccine is one of them, even if it's coming and stepping in emergency situations. But in general, prevention and will be actually the future. And the insurance companies can play a key role in the future to determine the prevention and forecasting role. So they will play a role with the public powers or side by side or in place of the public powers. You do it every day in terms of life insurance. You can request your insured to prepare the conditions to have the best conditions possible. You do car insurance and you urge people with the premiums to create the conditions not to have damages. So prevention is absolutely critical, and it is one of the major skill and businesses, and forecasting is the best skill of the insurance companies. And the digital world and digitalization, for the best or the worst, will create the risks to figure out what are the risks. And thanks to artificial intelligence, we will be soon having all individual data to be able to know whether someone is maybe have predisposition to such diseases, dependencies, or risks, and we could predict or assess a more or less confidential profile of those who might have or be able to be covered by insurance schemes or have potential diseases. But the question is whether the premiums will go up to the customizations or individualizations. This is an evolution that is happening, or will it be covering with a more costly manner those who maybe not covered, those who are maybe under drug addiction, alcohol addiction, etc., by insurance schemes. This is a natural trend. It is something resistible if a person freely can create the conditions of its non-dependence or maybe someone for genetic reasons is not responsible for his addiction. So you have seen it. We have been seeing new problems where the digitalization will scale up those questions, because not only we will be having these answers on these problems on life insurance, but also on other problems, natural disasters. We will be increasingly aware of the data and behavioral knowledge, which leads us to a different topic. So the first theme that I address is from the philosophical standpoint, and the other is in terms of relationship between cause and relationship. Science is seeking a causality. What causes what? The digital world only is limited to correlation. So we have massive data and volume of data, and data is telling us that these events are not correlated with others. So we draw consequences, but the events are so many. So the causes and consequences are so many that there's a very high risk to see science just vanish and disappear behind the mere search for correlations and causes. Therefore, we're not seeking anymore to know that such or such a disease is caused by such a behavior, but we will be limiting ourselves to have analyses that will link the correlation between such or such diseases. And we consider that this is a causal correlation that leads us to much deeper causes that we need to really study to come up with a deep prevention or forecasting, rather. So I am afraid, and we're seeing this appearing in many medical forecasts in the insurance world, and I fear that we are heading towards a society of correlation in which forecasting is limited to seek for statistic relations and data relations without studying the deep causes and deep economic sciences, which leads to a growing interdependence with fields that have no relations or no connections. I've been saying this. I don't know who will be the next organizing between insurance companies, data management, pharmaceutical companies, and political powers. But those who are managing the data, the GAFAs or artificial intelligence companies and the insurance companies, as well as pharmaceutical companies, are doing pretty much the same business in a way, and all of them do those businesses that are norm producers and standard producers. These are norms that are imposed to the public powers and guide them, because the public powers do not have the means to be as informed, competent, and powerful than the other sectors, insurance, pharmaceutical companies, and companies that three together represent leading powers and of calculations, competences, and knowledge. It is therefore paramount that public powers bring together a lot of knowledge in this field, and therefore insurance companies should work hand in hand and intensely with the public powers, for them not to limit democracy. We might fear one day an alliance between insurance companies, data managers, and pharmaceutical companies that will determine some behaviors that will allow to get some social protection, like a black hole of knowledge. It is therefore critical to avoid this, and for that we need to come up with the enabling conditions for insurance companies to work with the public powers in order to define democratic standards of forecasting and prevention that will not be only imposed from the outside, but also from the inside. But even if the contribution of the algorithms and GAFAs and medical companies will be, of course, still important on a very important instrument. Therefore, I believe that insurance companies and reinsurance companies that have a vital role to play will be increasingly important. And in the longer run, if there was something like a global regulation in terms of prevention, it will come through the insurance companies. We have seen it in other fields. The market economy, considered by the market economies as fundamental, the field of finance, and we've seen the mechanisms of risk protection within the central banks or market regulation organizations are reinsurance mechanisms that are set for and fixed by international organizations. And I think that all these concepts that we have seen appearing on the market, financial markets, will be generalized, and we will see with time new international standards. I'm not talking about a world or global government, but here insurance companies have played a very important role, by the way, on social protection, labor accidents, and they will be playing an increasing role in prevention and to counteract digital technologies. And we have to really look carefully at what's unfolding in the Scandinavian countries. They have a very clear vision of all these questions, and they are looking at this in compliance with deep democratic values and respect. And what's unfolding in China, where the eagerness to know the behaviors in a correlated manner and not by causality or mass analysis, to create the conditions of total social discipline. I'm not talking about total and not totalitarian. So if we look at the two models, we know perfectly well that this is all guided by a fundamental idea. At the end of the road, at the end of this journey, we always have to split between security and liberty, and liberty has to be put forward. We need to create the conditions for security, not just destroy liberty and freedom. We have to come up with the right sound conditions to prepare this enabling environment. Thank you very much.
Alors, dans vos propos, il y a quelque chose.
So in what you said, there was something that was quite interesting. So you were talking about turning to more preventive rather than curative approaches. But we as individuals, when we want to take out an insurance, well, insurance, I mean, we're trying to take out insurance to cover something that happens at a given moment. This is why we take out that insurance. So can we imagine that individuals in the future will maybe pay for a preventive solidarity tax to pay less if once the event occurs? So how will this be translated into actual insurance products? So let me ask you the second question. So a question from the audience. So what do you think could be how the insurance landscape could look like in Africa in the next 15 to 20 years? So the first question would probably take hours and hours to answer, because indeed there are new insurance products that could be introduced that could shift the coverage of insurance to prevention. But this assumes that insurance need to be logical and tailored to meet this demand. Obviously, we can charge more if the enabling conditions are in place for a higher service and for prevention. I mean, this service will be provided by someone, whether it's going to be by the states, by GAFAs, or by specific organizations, or will it be the insurance companies? So I believe that insurance companies are in the best position to provide this service and to obviously get paid to do so, provided that they do so properly. So the second question, I'm extremely optimistic regarding Africa. I believe that Africa has great growth potential. Obviously, we can draw a long list of problems in Africa. I'm not in as good of a position as you to do so, but I think that Africa has a very bright future. And I think that the first half of the 21st century is Asian, but the second half of the 21st century is African. And I truly believe that both demographic powers in 2050 will be India and Nigeria. And I think that there is a great potential for Moroccan insurance companies, or even Moroccan industries or banks that understood much more than others that it was interesting to go seek this potential in the African middle class, not only the French-speaking African middle class, which is an interesting market. but the rule of thumb is that to be able to move to progress, it's important to start out with the closer countries. But the DR, when the DRC will have an effective rule of law, it will be a great market for Africa, but everything will be based on Nigeria's stability. If Nigeria successfully remains stable and becomes increasingly stable, and in fact you have an extremely important role to play in that, well, the development of insurance in Nigeria, I believe, is absolutely incredible and gigantic. So thank you, Mr. Atadi. I would also like to mention Ethiopia too, which has a great potential, where French-speaking companies, Moroccan and French, are not sufficiently present. So thank you very much, Mr. Attali. On behalf of the Federation and all of the participants, would like to thank you, and also already look forward to meeting you for the next edition next year. If you have any comments or additional questions, please feel free to reach out to me. So we'd like to thank Mr. Attali for his presentation, and we will now continue with some testimonials and another panel discussion. We will have another keynote speaker, and we will meet back in just a few moments.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Parce que ce qui nous anime, ce qui nous transcende, ce qui nous fait porter la réassurance aux frontières du possible et au-delà, notre mission, notre vision, nos valeurs, c'est ce que l'on a de plus précieux, notre monde. Et si nous bâtissions ce monde uni pour un futur plus prospère, positif, radieux, responsable, généreux, altruiste, sûr, si nous marquions le monde de demain de notre empreinte, créateurs de résilience depuis 1960, nous avons une vision, devenir la référence de la réassurance dans les marchés émergents. Depuis notre création, nous tirons vers le haut notre ambition pour répondre aux exigences de nos clients et partenaires au Maroc et à l'international. Leader de la réassurance au Maroc, nous marquons de notre empreinte l'économie nationale en jouant un rôle central dans l'écosystème de l'assurance et de la réassurance au niveau national et régional, et en étant une institution financière solide, bénéficiant d'un excellent rating, opérant dans plus de 50 marchés avec plus de 300 en assurance, retour d'expérience des pays d'Amérique latine et du Sud.
Merci.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to all of you again to the Casablanca Insurance meeting. So we have reached the fifth keynote speaker. And so we will be introducing Mr. Rodrigo Bedoya, who will be talking to us about sharing with us his feedback on the Latin American and South American experience regarding experience.
Thank you very much. My pleasure to be here. Thank you for the invitation.
Thank you for being with us. Are you presently in which country?
I'm sorry?
In which country are you presently?
I am located right now in Bolivia.
In Bolivia. So it's early morning.
It's early morning right now.
Yeah,
Not so early. It's 9:36 in the morning.
Oh, we have to thank you. We have to double thank you. Mr. Bedoya, you're going to talk about experience feedback from Latin and South country?
That is correct.
Yeah, I will give you a starting question. What main regulations are needed to allow an adequate development of insurance inclusion?
I'm sorry, could you repeat that question, please? I can't hear you very well.
What main regulations are needed to allow an adequate development of insurance inclusion?
Right. Well, on the aspect, regulation is a very fundamental factor in order to promote the growth and development of inclusive insurance. That we have seen in many countries where regulators are first concerned about the issue. The first thing that regulators have to do is be aware of the opportunity that there is in either micro or mass insurance or inclusive insurance overall, and decide to take specific actions in order to promote the growth and the penetration of the insurance companies in these sectors. Mostly in the latter years, we have seen that innovation and technology, for instance, have played very important roles in fostering this kind of insurance. And unfortunately, in many Latin American countries, we are seeing very little emphasis on the regulation side. It seems that governments and regulators are not completely aware of the huge opportunity and the benefits that can be derived from fostering this kind of insurance.
Yes. Any new distribution channels that could be promoted to facilitate insurance inclusion?
Yes, of course. The distribution of micro insurance products today is still mainly dominated by micro insurance institutions. Mm-hmm. And over the last decade, mostly other financial institutions. There are definitely other opportunities along the distribution side of the microinsurance business, as many large retail chains can be used, mobile operators, and large retail chains. All of those channels can be used. In some countries, there are even the possibility of using the public utility companies in order to distribute microinsurance products that are very, very positive for lower segment populations of the economies. However, in other countries, there are laws that specifically prohibit the selling of insurance through utilities companies. And so, once again, governments and regulators have to sit down and try to analyze the whole situation from a very comprehensive perspective, and determine what sort of laws need to be changed or need to be modernized, and in what ways these new distribution channels can be implemented in many of the Latin American countries, where today it is very difficult for insurance companies to operate because regulation, specifically in some cases, does not allow them to do that.
Mm-hmm. You're talking about a lot about microinsurance. How does it work in Latin America? Is it a lower service insurance?
Is it a lower service insurance?
Yes. Yeah. When we hear microinsurance.
Right. Well, the concept of microinsurance in Latin America developed out of the about 25 years ago. We started seeing microinsurance institutions, financial institutions, arrive to Latin America, and specifically in Bolivia, which is my home country. We started seeing the arrival of a few international financial institutions that decided to focus on lending money to lower segments of the population that previously had been completely neglected by the traditional banking institutions. And so out of the decision of these financial institutions to lend small amounts of money to the lower segments of the population, or the informal population as it is usually referred to, derived in the necessity to cover the interests of the bank in case some of these lenders happen to have a loss or happen to pass away for some reason. And so these financial institutions approach the insurance companies in order to work together and start developing microinsurance products. So that is the origin of how microinsurance starts in Latin America. And of course, over the last 25 years, the rest of the financial institutions, the traditional banks, also identified not only that there was a very interesting business for the banks, for the financial institutions, in terms of the business itself of lending small amounts of money to these people that they had previously thought that they would not qualify in order to get loans, financial loans from the institutions. But they realized that this segment of the population turned out to be a very, very disciplined and responsible segment of the population, and that the margins of defaults were very, very low. The percentage of defaults on these credits were very, very low. So they decided to also get into this business. That when these international financial institutions arrived in Bolivia, the traditional banks were thinking they were crazy, because they were deciding to lend money to these people that they thought was a very, very risky segment of the population. So on the one hand, they realized that they had a business on their traditional main aspect of the business that they do, which is lend money. But on the other hand, they also realized that they would also be able to generate very substantial amounts of money from the commissions that the insurance companies would pay them in order to be able to sell insurance to these people. So over the last, over the last 2 decades, financial institutions in Bolivia and in the rest of Latin America have realized that microinsurance or inclusive insurance is a very important aspect of their business on the financial side, as well as on the insurance side, in terms of the commissions that they generate.
So the microinsurance is only to cover loans. It's not for health or for covering our houses, or it's mainly to cover loans risk, default risk.
Yes. Today in Latin America, microinsurance is still dominated by life and credit life products. So okay. I would say that life and credit life products certainly make up a very large percentage of the inclusive insurance or microinsurance market. But of course, over the last years, there have also been development in other lines of business, such as personal accident. We have seen the emergence of health as well. We have seen the emergence of health products, especially those that offer coverages for hospitalization. Hospitalization coverage is a coverage that seems to be very valuable to these segments of the population. And over the last few years, we have also seen the emergence of telehealth products, which are more accessible and offer tangible benefit. Other products that we have also seen that are being offered over the region are the burial or funeral expenses, agro insurance, a little bit of agro insurance. Agro insurance is more complex because most of the time, in order to have a successful agro insurance scheme, you need to have the participation of the state. And so that gets a little bit complicated. But beyond that, there's also been, or there are currently offers for theft insurance, for multi-risk, and also for extended warranty risks. So we have seen the portfolio of insurance products grow substantially over the last 2 or 3 decades since the start of the microinsurance phenomenon here in Latin America.
What are the main climate risk that you are facing in Latin America?
Well, I think it depends on what country you are talking about. I think Latin America is a very, very diverse region, and in some regions you have exposure to earthquakes, such as in Chile or in Mexico. So that is a very big concern. But I would say that beyond those specific countries with catastrophic exposure, that usually it's the climate risks that are associated with rain, or with wind, or with snow most of the time. So yes, those are concerns for the small producers, for the small farmers, and I know for a fact that the private insurance sector has tried to offer agro insurance solutions, but like I say, I think the experience has been one whereby only the private insurance sector, it becomes very difficult to them to offer comprehensive agro insurance solutions without the partnership with the governments.
Yeah. If we talk about these last months and the pandemic effect, what happened with insurance in Latin America? Did you have more demand from the customers, or a different demand?
Right. I think that is a very good question. On the one hand, what the pandemic brought to the insurance sector in most countries, first of all, it was a very, very big impact on life insurance companies, because life insurance companies had been offering life insurance on the basis of traditional metrics in order to estimate the mortality rate. And all of a sudden, pretty much in a very short amount of time, we started seeing those mortality rates increase sometimes 2 or 3 or 4 times over the average mortality rates that the region had been seeing over many decades before. And so that posed a very, very big challenge to the life insurance companies that, for the most part, had to confront this exposure without really having taken it into account. Fortunately, I would say that the Latin American insurance sector entered the year 2020 of the pandemic well capitalized, and that allowed the insurance industry as a whole to be able to be up to the challenge of paying all these claims. But
on the other hand, with the lockdown, you had less risk with insurance.
Well, you have to be a little bit careful there, because yes, it is evident what you are saying, but some of the lines of business where the market saw drastically or significantly lower loss ratios were in lines of general insurance and not life insurance. And in most Latin American countries, life and non-life insurance companies are separate entities.
Okay.
So we did see in many countries cases where non-life insurance companies benefited, especially in the motor line of business, where loss ratios were significantly lower. But if you are managing or you were a shareholder in only a life insurance company in Latin America, then you were probably hit very hard. Now, this is where we also were able to determine that in insurance, it is always important to be diversified, because some insurance companies were diversified enough with products, for instance, on the health side of the business, the health insurance, and that line of business also experienced significantly lower loss ratios than what they were used to. But overall, the impact specifically from the increase in mortality in Latin America was very, very large. So that I answered your question from the insurance side of the business. From the consumer side of the business, I think that what we saw is a very tangible situation whereby many families or many customers of insurance companies or customers of financial institutions that unfortunately passed away due to the virus, all of a sudden realized that they had this coverage that they had acquired. Sometimes, and this is something that I think we have to work in Latin America, I think that the communication between the financial institutions and their customers in terms of what kind of insurance specifically is the one that they're getting or one that is being offered to them is not so clear. So in many cases, and we saw this ourselves with a company that I work in, we saw people realize all of a sudden that they had coverage because the main person that had taken out the loan had passed away, whether it be the husband or the wife. And they thought they were in big trouble. They thought that they were really going to have tremendous difficulty in order to repay the bank. And so when the bank called to say, hi, hello, we are calling to see how you are doing and to remind you that there are some outstanding payments, or in order to communicate in some cases that there had been an extension stated by the government in order to repay those loan amounts, they realized that the banks learned through those calls that the main person that had taken out the loan had passed away. So when they communicated to the family members that there was insurance to cover this, they were, of course, very, very excited. So there's been a great increase in consciousness of the benefits of the insurance. And I think insurers have to take that experience and capitalize on that for the years in the future.
So one last question. We have only 3 minutes left. Digitalization in insurance. I know that what are the sectors or activities in insurance companies that need a greater technological, let's say, gap?
Right. Well, I think the technology is everywhere these days, and entrepreneurs are going to find ways to apply technology to many different businesses, and of course, insurance is not the exception. I think the problem with the use of technologies in Latin America is the fact that in many countries, regulators have not been able to keep up with the technological advancements in the industry. And in many cases, insurance companies are not allowed to implement these technologies because the laws date back to the 70s or the 80s, and they have not been updated. In 2/3 of the countries in Latin America, you do not have still regulation that allows for insurance policies to be sold digitally.
On the internet, yeah.
On the internet. And sometimes, in some cases, even, and Bolivia is one of those cases, unfortunately, insureds have to physically sign the policies when they receive them. And so that is something that is on the responsibility of the regulators. It is something that...
And I guess this will change with what happened during the pandemic. I mean, we cannot be... we cannot neglect this side of the distribution channel.
No, of course not. It poses a very big opportunity for insurance companies. It tends to make insurance, the whole insurance buy-in and administration of an insurance policy much more easy, much more cost-effective. And also we cannot forget that we are dealing increasingly with a segment of the population that is only used to dealing and purchasing things through their mobile phones. And when you tell them that they cannot purchase insurance that way, then obviously that reduces the possibility or the chances of them even acquiring the coverage.
Thank you, Mr. Bedoya. Thank you for taking time to share with us your experience. And hope to see you again.
Of course. Thank you very much for the invitation again, and look forward to seeing you again.
Mesdames, Messieurs, nous reprenons.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll resume in just a few moments with a new panel.
Un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance. Un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil. Et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance. Un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil. Et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Seven, six, five, four, three, two, one.
Rebonjour.
Hello again, and welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting. We have now reached the last session of this afternoon on Thursday, April 1st. So before proceeding to panel number 4, we would like to first to start by giving a nice push to a startup. So its name is Docti.ma, and it supports health journeys in Morocco and the management of these medical files that individuals have a hard time keeping up with. And so it provides support and creates the link between individuals, insurance companies, and we will, without further ado, take a look at a short video introducing this startup.
Docti.ma a pour objectif de digitaliser le parcours de soins au Maroc. Et cela passe en partie par la mise en place d'outils digitaux qui vont permettre de faciliter la gestion des acteurs de santé au Maroc. J'ai travaillé pendant 3 ans au sein du startup studio d'AXA Assurance à Londres sur des problématiques.
We've covered topics related to health and digital insurance, and is this experience that shows us the key role of innovation in this sector. So today, the insurance sector, well, despite all of the inherent risks of the business, well, it needs to push things forward to adapt to the new needs of its insured. So this is a sector that is extremely dynamic, where the needs of patients and the insured are very numerous, and technological advances make it possible to better meet these new needs. Docti.ma makes it possible to insurers to develop or introduce new digital tools such as telemedicine, digitalized devices that make it possible to improve the medical services for insureds. And so health insurers can better protect themselves against the risk and reducing consultation costs, etc., and better serve their customers. So our ambition in the short term is to lay the first foundation for new health innovations, and later on, in the longer term, to truly digitalize the medical care from the beginning to the end. It is, in fact, in this vein that we have signed a first partnership agreement with Maroc Assistance International, with whom we are developing digital tools to better take into account the health of the insured. Anticipating needs in terms of a patient's health and to better understand their behavior, and as such, to ensure better risk prevention by increasing points of contact with patients by, for example, through telemedicine, through prevention, through apps for the management of chronic illnesses. Well, insurers can better manage the health of their insured and reduce costs. In 2041, insurance will be connected, but especially more humane and more attentive to insured needs. So we believe that insurance will be led by the insured, and it will make it possible for insurers to improve customers' experiences. And so in 2041, insurance will be an intrinsic partner of its insured, and will help them to better protect themselves against the risks that life may bring. What needs to change to favor innovation and inclusion in insurance?
Que faudrait-il changer pour favoriser l'innovation et l'inclusion en assurance?
What should we change to foster innovation inclusion in insurance? A vast subject, if need be repeated, and we are receiving prestigious.
What needs to be changed to foster innovation and inclusion? Mr. Dean Cameron, Director of Insurance Department in the National Commission of Insurance Commissioners. Welcome. Mr. Olaf Jones, Deputy General Manager, Insurance Europe. Mr. Fausto Parente, Executive Director in the European Insurance and Occupational Pensions Authority. Welcome. My first question will be for Mr. Cameron, and I'll give him the floor to speak for about 7 to 8 minutes, and then I give the questions to the other guests. Mr. Cameron, first question. What is the role of regulators and insurers in fostering inclusive insurance today?
Well, first of all, thank you for the opportunity to share some thoughts with you and to be invited virtually. I wish we could be together in person and look forward to that day. As you mentioned, I am the director of the Idaho Department of Insurance, and I am president-elect of the National Association of Insurance Commissioners. So I'm here to speak on behalf of the NAIC and its 56 jurisdictions that make up the NAIC. Let me just say from the outset, all 56 jurisdictions of the NAIC desire to protect consumers first and foremost. We desire to protect consumers by having products available to meet their needs. We desire to protect consumers by assuring appropriate safeguards are in place for appropriate underwriting, appropriate clear and understandable language, and certainly appropriate financial solvency. All 56 jurisdictions believe in the products and services provided by insurance, and we understand the importance of these products in providing financial and economic security in today's risks. The NAIC is actively working on a variety of initiatives with an aim towards fostering greater inclusivity in the insurance industry and across organizations. This includes supporting the creation and the increased use of innovative products, which will further expand access to insurance. One important element in inclusivity is ensuring consumers are informed on a wide variety of insurance options to them in order to meet their specific needs. Recently, the NAIC Special Committee on Race and Insurance under our executive committee was created and is incorporating inclusivity as a core principle in our current and future workings. Of course, we're looking very carefully to see how big data and information gathered affects consumers and affects the industry as a whole. Thank you.
What are the tools in innovation that are used to promote inclusivity? What do you do in this field?
First of all, we're still, like many, we're still developing some of those tools, but we are certainly working with the industry. We participate in a variety of collaborations between individual regulators and the industry itself. We have toolboxes that and toolkits that we use to assist. Of course, all of the the industry as a whole is coming up with their own approaches and innovations, and so we meet regularly with individual companies and entities as they try and work through that. When it comes to inclusivity, we're of course we're focusing on on those data sectors to make sure that the data itself is not creating exclusivity or is not in a way preventing access.
Yes. Does it include selling insurance products on internet? For example, is it still an option, or is it something common?
No, it's probably not as common as it could be, but it is an option. And as we know, there are a number of companies that are selling products both on the internet, through their mobile phones, looking for options. I think what's important to us is that consumers are informed of the products they're buying. Listen, the biggest benefit to any insurance product is confidence that the consumer is going to receive the benefits that they need when they need them. And anything that we do that dismays that confidence or curtails that confidence makes it more difficult for us to provide coverage to individuals and entities where there are gaps. So certainly we're working very carefully to make sure that those companies that sell on the internet or elsewise are doing their job and that they're regulated in an appropriate manner. There's been sometimes some suggestion that somehow innovation means that you have less regulation. Well, I don't know that I agree with that. Certainly, but we have in my state in particular, and a number of other states, we have eliminated a lot of regulation that was unnecessary and cleaned up a lot of others, and that's certainly appropriate. But it doesn't automatically mean with an innovative product that there should be
less regulation.
Less regulation.
Yeah, thank you. Mr. Jones, talking about inclusivity, what is the greater problem, lack of demand from those not covered or the cost that is too high? And my question is for Mr. Jones. Mr. Jones, are you with us?
Yes, thank you. And I also very much appreciate the chance to be here virtually and hope in the future we can meet in person. But indeed, I think that the challenge of inclusivity does come from both sides. I think there is a challenge to make sure that the products can be offered at an appropriate price and the right products can be offered. And that will require innovation from insurers. It also requires innovation and developments from governments and from regulators and supervisors as well. But it also, we need financial education to make sure that the citizens who lack the cover realize the benefits and the need, and they also seek the cover. So we need, in a way, a push from insurers and from governments to get people covered, but also pull from the citizens and the businesses so they seek cover. And I think if we can find the right center point there, we will make real progress for addressing the protection gaps and the saving gaps that exist at the moment.
But let's say an example. Let's take an example. You're living in Europe, and in many countries you have the minimum wage. Does someone who have the minimum wage can afford insurance product that are not mandatory, insuring the house, insuring a life, for instance?
Well, this is a real challenge. I think that at the moment it's clearly difficult at a minimum wage, but I think that again it comes back to the right innovation and also the right education to get people to understand that in the long term that buying and having insurance, whether it's saving for your pension, whether it's protection in case the main caregiver or income giver dies or has an accident, or whether it's to protect them against an external event such as a windstorm or earthquake, it really is a good investment for them. And as Director Cameron said, that they will get the benefit when they need it. I think in order to achieve that, we do need a range of things to happen. I mean, I think the first thing, we do need universal internet access, because the distribution costs need to come down, and that can be achieved through digitalization. That means the internet. It means more use of mobile phones, which is something many people have, most people have access to. So we have to make sure that those are affordable and accessible. And that obviously can involve government intervention and playing a role to make sure that the infrastructure is there to allow that.
You're talking about internet universal access. What about insurance universal access?
Well, to achieve that, we need to find a way to lower the costs. And that could, again, governments play a certain role, insurers play a role there. Again, what we see in Europe in some cases, that insurance premiums are taxed, and that creates a disincentive and adds an extra cost to the process. So we think the government should be very careful before taxing insurance products, because this is an investment in the economy, and actually we think it will pay itself back. Insurers have to find ways of lowering the cost of provision. We mentioned innovation in terms of digitalization, but also there are other ways we can use technology. For example, trying to make sure that the customer only gets the cover they really need. So for example, when it comes to driving, there are innovations where insurers are now looking at covering per mile instead of per year, so that the customer gets only the insurance they need, and the price and the cover can be tailored to that, and that can lower the costs. But this does involve digitalization, it involves innovation. but I think these things are needed to help make insurance more affordable and accessible to all.
Was it applied, this mile coverage?
In different markets, there are already these innovations happening, and in a number of markets, certainly in Europe, these products are offered. Indeed, also there are products being offered where we're looking at trying to reduce the cost of administration by paying out automatically when there's a certain weather event. So there are various innovations that are taking place, but I think these innovations need to take place on a wider scale in order for them to have the full potential impact that's possible.
And be accompanied with digitalization. I have a question for Mr. Parente. On the side of inclusivity, how can we make sure that consumers fully understand the coverage they are buying? This is the main question for consumers, so that they are not disappointed if they do not, or they make a claim about the insurance. How can we make sure that consumers fully understand what they are buying? Because in most insurance products, you know, you have these little warnings or contract stipulations. It's written so small. How can we make sure that they understand what they're buying? Mr. Parente.
Thank you. First of all, let me also thanks for the kind invitation. And unfortunately, last year we couldn't, because I was supposed to come last year in person. So it was much better, of course, if we could have done it. So as the other speaker, I still hope that one day we can meet in person in this important forum. Also because I remember when I was there for holidays, is an excellent place. Casablanca. Anyway, apart from that, and thanks, your question is quite key. You are perfectly right in my view. We need to make all the effort possible to clarify what the coverage, what the product is. In Europe, we have experienced a different degree of information to be given to the consumers, but we are now, honestly speaking, in a phase of, I don't want to say completely, but deeply rethinking our regulation, because we understood finally in those periods, especially also because of the COVID crisis and the fact that many clients discovered they were not covered against this kind of pandemic, this kind of risk, that in the end, more information. In the past, we said, we clearly stated in the regulation how many information, what kind of information an insurer or a distributor needs to provide to the client. But actually, the reality is that people have difficulty in understanding. So we need to rethink about which information are really needed, how to present it, which language to be used, and also the format should be fit for the digitalization, for the new world in which we are living. We also, my colleagues have talked about digitalization, internet, and so on. So we need to reshape the information to be given to the client on the basis of the digital first. We have an experience in this regard, a new product, which is named the PEP, Pan-European Personal Pension Product, which is about to start next year, is based on a new regulation the European co-legislator issued. And in that case, we were able to rethink the information how to be given and have in mind that this product should be sold principally, mainly on a digital tool, on an iPhone or whatever. So this is the example we need to take for the future. And so it's key, but it's also, we need to think that the behavioral research has shown how people interact with financial. I agree with Olaf, there is a need also to more financial literacy, financial education. But this is a long-term objective. We need to work on it, and fine, we are working on it. But in the short term, we need to please help us in redesign the way in which this information are given on the basis of the behavioral research that now is quite, let's say, clear. People read something, they need infographic, they need the simple design, simple things. And on top of it, I also would like to to hope that the insurer sell more simple product, because sometimes, honestly, we have seen that even educated, let's say, financial educated people like us, the supervisor, have difficulty in understanding some product which are too complex, simply too complex. We don't need so much complexity in many cases. So this is a bit of my. I will stop here. Go.
Excuse me. No, you stay with me. Do you mean that the products that are now on the market are a little bit complex for people, normal people, and that we should have a diversification in simple products, maybe less expensive and simple products? And second question is, does digitalization will help in understanding the nature and the extent of the coverage?
Digitalization can help if we rethink and design the information, the disclosure of the characteristics of the process for the digital tool. If we simply use the digital tool with the current set of regulatory requirements, it's not that the tool helps so much in the end. We need to give the information that people need. And on your question on complexity, of course, we cannot, there are many products which are quite good and simple and easy to understand, fine. But there are areas, we unfortunately have seen some product which is simply too complex, especially, for example, some life product with the risk, the unit-linked product, for example, with the risk passed to the policyholder, where it's not completely clear how many options the investor has, and sometimes it's simply too difficult.
Okay. So we have one last question for the three of you. We have 5 minutes left, and the question is, and I want the answer of each of you: how can we make sure that consumers remain protected when they share so much data? We have cybersecurity, and they have, in general, data security. I want the answer of Mr. Cameron, please, and then Mr. Jones and Mr. Parente. Mr. Cameron.
Well, first of all, I think appropriate regulation, and we are at the NAIC working very diplomatically to work through the data, big data issues as data is collected. I did want to answer your question earlier. We've sort of bypassed the use of agents here, and I know the marketing arm needs to be curtailed, perhaps, or costs need to be curtailed. But let's remember that the agents really provide an economic benefit to the community and consumer education and protection. And we are advocates for clear and concise language. We believe consumers should know what data is collected and how it's used.
Mr. Jones?
Yes, I think the insurers take data protection very seriously. They've been dealing with sensitive information for many, many years. The digital world adds another dimension to that, both positive but also some risks and concerns. But insurers take that responsibility very, very carefully and seriously. I think one of the things we do need to establish is that data is owned by the customer, and the customer should be free to share that data with different suppliers, including insurers, and it shouldn't be sort of ring-fenced by certain players in the market.
Mr. Parente?
Yeah, if you look at our website in the next weeks, we will issue soon digital ethical principle for the use of data in this digital world in insurance. Why? Because I agree the people need to have confidence that their data are used properly. I agree with the fact that people may want to share it because they have better prices. Digitalization and data helps in profiling their risk. So cheaper product, excellent. But still, the use of data needs to respect some ethical rules. And here, at least in Europe, we still don't have so much clear rule on how to use the data what is possible or what is not possible. So we are in May, we will issue a discussion paper on those principles. So I hope that this will help launching a debate on how to better protect consumer in that regard.
Thank you, gentlemen. On behalf of the Federation of Moroccan Insurers, I give you my warm thanks, and I extend the invitation for the next year, if you wish.
Thank you.
And
without COVID.
Okay. Goodbye and thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Merci, mesdames, messieurs. On reprend dans quelques...
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much. We are going to continue with our next keynote speaker, and after that, we'll follow panel number 6.
Le Casablanca de l'assurance, un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance, un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil. Et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance, un format inédit et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent, comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix. Ou quelque...
La réponse des réassureurs à la pandémie, résilience et innovation.
Welcome back et bienvenue à...
Welcome to this session on this session of the Casablanca Insurance Meeting. This is the final afternoon, so we will be having a talk with the reinsurers. They're the ones that suffered the most from this pandemic. So Mr. Rousseau is a member of the executive committee of Vous, Group, and he will be talking to us about the response to reinsurers with regard to the pandemic. So I have a few questions to ask you, and it's important to note in the context of a pandemic, and so when risks generalize and cover everyone, well, insurers turn to reinsurers, but who do reinsurers turn to? So we are eager to hear what you'll have to say. So thank you very much for this invitation. I'm delighted to be able to take the floor here during the Casablanca Insurance Meeting. So maybe we'll start by answering your question before jumping into the presentation that I prepared. So they turn to their customers, and this is a key challenge for reinsurers. So generally, reinsurers insure insurers, and the question is to see how the idea is to ensure that they aren't too far from the risk. So they first turn to their customers, so to the risk first and foremost, and then obviously they turn to the soundness of their balance sheets. As far as the response to reinsurance, resilience and innovation, so I prepared two preliminary comments. So the first is a historical perspective. It's important to note that reinsurance, as we know it today, was born in the 19th century as a financer of the Industrial Revolution. So to finance infrastructure projects that German and Swiss reinsurance companies were created. So reinsurance was born following these projects to that were meant to finance a revolution. And so given this participation of reinsurers to this technological revolution is quite interesting. This is why a reinsurer generally intersects between three traits. So as an entrepreneur, to understand and support these clients, and so in this sense, they can also be engineers to truly understand the underlying risks, and then also a mathematician, because the idea here is it's a question of modeling, and so the absorption of risks, which requires this modeling. And finally, which begs the question of the relationship with public power. So reinsurers intervene as a supplement, or sometimes compete with public powers, and this is something that we see through national reinsurers or mandatory transfers. So there's sort of intersection between the public and private spheres. And so I believe that these solutions to the pandemic with regard to the relationship with reinsurance and the public sector is quite important. So my second introductory remark relates to the characteristics of this crisis. So this is a pandemic, has a biometric notion, and so it's the first time that we have such a pandemic in modern times. So the last pandemic dates back to the Spanish flu in the early 20th century, and so this is a crisis that we could qualify as biometric, but ended up being occurring at a much larger scale when we see the claims that are reported by insurers and reinsurers. So the biometric risk for life segment only represents 10% of the business. So 90% is bond insurance or property and casualty insurance or general liability. So we witnessed a real surprise over the last 10 months. So most people were expecting a mortality crisis. But what's interesting is that there's a property and casualty insurance that is prevalent. So it's obviously there was the canceling of major events such as the Olympics or the coverage of business interruption covers. So these are two sources of risk that were prevalent. And so the other questions that are posed are general liability and bond insurance. So this crisis is unique in its spatial, and it's in terms of space and time. I mean, it is global and from a time standpoint because it's been going on for more than a year. So if these are claims that stand between $40 and $100 million, and so we were at about $35 billion today. This doesn't mean that the crisis won't be as strong as expected, but this just means that there weren't as many claims reported. So the situation that reinsurers are in today is that there is a multiplicity and an increase of the frequency of these claims. So over the past 10 years, we've had natural or human events that multiply and increase, so which leads to the question on regarding the resistance, and this is different from resilience. And so in fact, so there's the question of resistance up until certain points, and so which also leads to the question on resilience. So how do we manage to resist and to handle the shock on the balance sheet? So this is the first added value. But if their role only is limited to that, well, reinsurers won't necessarily provide sufficient value to their customers. So to give you a simple answer to the question that's asked to me today on the role of reinsurers, I would first of all focus on this financial stability to absorb shocks and to be able to face this growing risk, and the sustainability. And so with regards to sustainability, well, it's a question of expertise. So this was my first answer. We need to know our customers. We need to know the risk. So this expertise of the reinsurers is necessary to be able to have access to the risk. And we also need to be able to indemnify this risk. So I think in market economy, this is particularly complex to be able to explain to the insured and the insurers the real cost of the risk. So the first answer on the role of the reinsurer is the financial stability. The second, which is essential if you wish to be a leader on our market, is to be able to help our customers develop. How do reinsurers, not only position themselves as risk leaders, but supporters of insurance companies and of the economy in general to help them develop? So here we're talking about the development of products, of services, and technology obviously has a key role to play. So I'll give you a real example, a Moroccan example, where SCORE invests a lot of time and a lot of resources in partnerships that are truly interesting. And so these are agricultural risks. So Morocco has announced in 2008 the Green Morocco Plan, and in 2020 the Green Generation was also launched. So there's a real public impetus that places the agricultural industry at the heart of the country's development. And so this public impetus is absolutely necessary, and this is something that we can witness in Morocco and many other countries. And often the public authorities do spur these types of initiatives. So I'd like to give you the example of a small company, Sweet, which was started by two Moroccans, which in fact is a company that handled on the one side from Morocco, but whose ambitions go well beyond its Moroccan borders. And so the problem that they're trying to tackle is the lack of information regarding agriculture, farmers, and obviously agriculture plays a key role in Morocco. And so within the scope that we're working on with this company is the risk of citrus fruits, where there's the risk with fruits are quite high. There's a real stake, there are major stakes, and so it's important to be able to evaluate these claims such as droughts. I mean, we need to be able to detect the water stress that can occur in certain fields. And first and foremost, the idea through this partnership is to be able to manage potential claims. So it's a service, it's not necessarily an insurance product. And so behind this claim management, this agricultural risk, the idea is to develop parametric insurance products where the triggering of the claim is based on an index and not on a specific indemnity, and to have insurance solutions or products that are innovative and that are made possible through technology, through drones and satellites, where we can have imaging of the plots of land and of soil that allow us to develop new products. And so, which leads us to major producers that are covered, and many more exporters will also be covered. And in the future, this is a key point that I intend to elaborate on. And so if we develop this product for citrus fruits and fruits in Morocco, well, we have a similar program in Brazil, where we need to see the global dimension of the reinsurance industry and also insurance. And this is where I think that the national positions or protections are very dangerous for our industry. And so it's important to ensure that reinsurance and insurance do have a real synergy. So for example, for fruit, when we'll have a solution that will be effective on the Moroccan market, well, we can export the solution or products rather to Turkey, to Brazil, for example. And conversely, the project that we're developing with Airbus and local Brazilian businesses will also benefit Morocco the day that we'll be able to develop this type of product in Morocco. And so this will be the conclusion of my presentation today. So the idea is to see what are the keys to success for the intervention of reinsurers. So first of all, it's an open economy based on sharing of data, sharing of intellectual property. And here, I mean, the protectionists, given that they're on rising everywhere, well, these constitute a major threat. And so globalization does allow for this flexibility of capital. And so the second priority is to be able to go through cycles in the long term. So the maybe shorter term players don't necessarily allow for remuneration of a risk, or do not allow for the investment cycles such as what we're doing with this startup. So the idea is to partner up with a local insurer. For example, we can partner up with a Moroccan insurer, and we will go out and protect the insurer for this particular solution. So there's an entire chain which allows us to, I mean, if we have some frontiers that try to get more rather shorter term benefits, well, this does have a negative impact in the long run. So what's interesting is regulation. And so the question is to see to which extent resilience is a factor of regulation. So obviously, and this is something we saw with the 2008 crisis, after the financial crisis, banks were increasingly regulated. But I also believe that this regulation, this additional regulation, can become excessive. And so when it becomes excessive, it is harmful to innovation and to this capacity to welcoming in new players and to have a different perception on insurance products. So the notion of the fair, of just the right amount of regulation and to have the right dose of protection and openness. And so this is also something that we see in these oversight of national regulators. We also see this in accounting standards. And so for those of you that took a look at IFRS 17 standards, well, they've already had to struggle. And for the rest, I wish them great luck. So the complexity of the accounting frameworks and the accounting standards are growing, are expanding. And so this is what makes these barriers, which increase the barriers to the insurance business. I mean, so for example, for solvency with Solvency II for the European countries and for Moroccan countries are developing solvency frameworks that have where there's an evaluation of assets and liabilities. So to answer your question and to conclude my presentation, so this long-term partnership is essential between insurers, reinsurers, and the public authorities. And I think that the partnership is truly the key word, and maybe it's overused. And so the reality is we are on a trial and error phase. And so we as reinsurers need to be able to access the underlying risks. On the other hand, we need to be able to obtain the right pricing of the risk, and this is what will allow us to have a double A balance sheet rating for our balance sheet. So if I properly understood what you said, is that we reinsurers sometimes intervene upstream to prevent risks and to educate the insured in such a way as to reduce the risk. And so a sound use of the products, a sound use of materials, for example, and just developing good habits for corporates or farmers or individuals. So generally, insurers talk about having preventive measures. And so earlier we had the same discussion with Mr. Attali. Are there insurance products that maybe are preventive products? So, for example, if I know that insurance applies to something that will be occurring in the future, but maybe are preventive insurance products in the insurance business's future. Now, in the framework of prevention, will in the insurance business shift towards a new model, or will be creating new products? So this question of exposure ex ante risks, or well, I'm sure there are. We can see both effects. What I can tell you about the pandemic, there were pandemic products available, but they simply weren't sold. Nobody took out these types of insurance products. So the question that I think is important today, obviously we do need to manage the COVID crisis. It's so far from being over, is the idea is to see whether there is a sufficient and real awareness on the necessity to share information and to, for example, disclose the cyber attacks that insurance companies are subjected to. So as long as there's a crisis, as long as people don't experience a crisis or a risk, well, there's no real awareness. And so this is true that following this crisis, we can turn to and we can start anticipating. So, if a product is unaffordable or too expensive, or there's a real need, well, it won't generate interest. So which leads me to the question. So you will answer the question on COVID and whether it will change the models and whether the pandemic is insurable. And so if I understood correctly, there are three types of major risks today that are planet-related risks. Well, there's the climate risk, there's the pandemic risk, and the cybersecurity risk. If we were to talk about global risks that are concern the entire planet, so I will answer the question. It's true that the pandemic, involves the entire calls upon the real shift in the shift of the insurance sector, and so there is obviously we see events that occur very rarely, but they have a very high cost. And so this is the first time that we see this, for example, in the life segment. So there's pricing that's reviewed. The extreme scenarios are reviewed. and so the purely life scenarios are also reviewed, but also with their correlation with property and casualty insurance. So, for example, when the pandemic started, it didn't really take much for the entire global ecosystem to be disrupted. So with regard to the three, I do agree with the three risks that you mentioned, but I am afraid that there are others. I mean, I would also add one that is imminently concrete and is political risk. And as you can see today, I mean, I'm based in Paris, so I'm speaking from my living room. So since yesterday, we have, I mean, the situation has drastically tightened, and so there are some countries that reacted in a zero COVID manner. For example, China or Korea had a very drastic responses, but many other countries, often that are quote unquote called democracies and don't necessarily have the political means or to impose lockdowns or that could generate a zero COVID situation. And so this is why there many countries are faced with this political risk, the domestic risk, but also geopolitical risks. And I would say that this is a particularly high risk. I mean, this is something we witnessed in 2008, and so it started out we started out with a financial crisis, which turned into an economic crisis, and then in the backdrop we saw the Arab Spring, we saw the European Union crisis. I mean, the sequencing of political risk is particularly unforeseeable, and it can occur upstream and downstream. So the lack of response in upstream and could also have repercussions in downstream. I would say that political risks rank up pretty high up there, and they are increasingly. So thank you, Mr. Laurent. Thank you very much, and we hope that you'll be here with us for the 8th Casablanca Insurance meeting. Thank you very much. Thank you. Goodbye. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. So in a few moments, we will head over to the next portion of our Casablanca Insurance meeting. We will have another testimonial. We're delighted to have that. And as such, we will have the 6th roundtable with our next panelist. Thank you very much.
Le constat viable, c'est la première brique de la...
So, insurance.
Action fait partie du startup studio de DevCorp Technology. On l'a lancé.
Action is launched in this goal to improve the customer's experience and to actually improve the claim value chain. And the biggest kind of barrier was the data collection before. Innovation in the insurance world is a disruptive type of innovation. Artificial intelligence and data collection will be playing a critical role in the future. We're going to be able to use AI to fight against fraud and do forecasts of claims by using data and bring visibility to the data in real time and mitigate the footprint and kind of customize the offer to the client according to their needs and profiles. And this is what's going to be making the customer's experience much better. So our objective is that the MFFA and the ecosystem insurance system will bring a value added. So this solution is adapted and matching the whole insurance ecosystem in Africa. So why not exporting the solution to other countries beyond Morocco? We look ahead for a much more digitalized and flexible type of system. We want the vulnerable population groups to be more protected. The ecosystem needs to be fair and more equitable. in 2041, insurance will be connected, but even more and more human on meeting the people's needs. So digitalization will be allowing insurance companies to improve the customer's experience and consolidate trust and confidence among clients. So in 2041, insurance will be an intertwined partner of these vulnerable groups, helping them to face the challenges of life.
Bienvenue dans le Casablanca de l'assurance, un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance, un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sana d'assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance. Un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sana s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sana d'assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Le digital pour améliorer l'inclusion et dépasser les contraintes de la Covid. Le digital pour améliorer l'inclusion et dépasser les contraintes de la Covid.
Ladies and gentlemen, welcome again in our panel number 5, fifth panel.
To improve inclusion and overcome COVID constraints. Our speakers will be Stephen Simchak, Vice President of the Council, American Property Casualty Insurance Association. Welcome, Mr. Stephens. Mr. Simchak. James Kent, CEO of Willis Ray Company. Welcome, Mr. Kent. Daniel Polchot, Chief Business Transformation Officer of Allianz Company. And we have two guests from the same company, the same group, Société Générale. We have Philippe Vial, DG de la Marocaine, de la
General Manager of La Marocaine V, and Laurent Jodon, Director of Partnership of the Société Générale Group. Welcome, gentlemen.
We have 13 minutes in the panel, and that gives you approximately 8 minutes per group. So my first question will be for Mr. Simchak, and what lessons can be earned from the rapid acceleration of digitalization from the pandemic? What can we say about it?
Surely. Well, thank you very much for having me at this excellent conference. And it's such a pleasure to be with you all today. And I want to thank my dear friends and colleagues at the Moroccan Federation for having me. I hope that we can all be together in person someday very soon. Well, that's a great question. There's a lot of discussion in the United States and around the world about the regulatory relief and regulatory accommodations offered by governments and regulators as a result of the pandemic. And the conversation seems to be focusing now on whether those measures should be continued and made permanent. Many of those temporary measures accelerated digitalization of all the steps in the insurance policy life cycle to a much higher degree than ever before. COVID-19 forced regulators and insurers to change the way that we serve its customers so that the insurance industry could meet the consumer's needs in a timely and efficient manner, while also protecting the health and safety of employees and customers as the pandemic progressed. In the United States, the pandemic resulted in over 800 orders and bulletins being issued in a very short period of time. That's a lot of change in a very short period of time. In retrospect, many of these changes were possible because of the technological advances and the industry's innovative drive to continually to provide more and better service to its customers. As a guiding principle, I think that if some digitalization of insurance processes was permitted during the pandemic and it improved the customer experience or insurer efficiency and didn't harm prudential or consumer protection outcomes, then I think it should be allowed to become permanent. To the extent that it's not clear whether the measure harmed prudential outcomes or consumer protection, I think that the governmental authorities and insurers should then engage in a discussion about whether or not it should be made permanent or be allowed to lapse. I'd like to take just a moment to speak about 3 areas where we saw digitalization expand as a result of the pandemic. Those 3 would be electronic commerce, regulatory capabilities, and claims processing. Turning to electronic commerce, customers want and need electronic communications and transactions that move at the speed of commerce. Importantly, the pandemic cemented the reality of this need and desire from consumers for more electronic commerce and in a more urgent manner. Additionally, I think I should point out that there are positive environmental impacts that flow from the faster electronic interactions, as insurers need to use less paper, need to use less fuel to go to meetings, and generally reduce their impact on the environment from electronic transactions. Specifically, the areas of electronic commerce where we saw an acceleration of digitalization as a result of the pandemic included electronic signatures, electronic delivery of policy languages and notices, and electronic notarization. For the most part, the experience of insurers and consumers during the pandemic in those areas suggests that the temporary measures that allow them should be made permanent in many cases. Turning quickly to the regulatory capabilities and digitalization of regulatory processes in our sector, during the pandemic, many, but not all, US states were willing to be flexible with regard to corporate governance and regulatory filing issues. I'd like to provide 5 examples of temporary regulatory measures that I think regulators should consider making permanent. Several states allowed for in-person classroom licensing requirements to be met by attending a webinar and electronically signing into a class. 2, consumer affairs divisions in most states started sending complaints by email instead of postal mail. 3, permitting financial and market conduct exams to be conducted remotely is another important area of development that came from the pandemic experience. And there I would note that video platforms allow for the same person-to-person communication that examiners were looking for, much like we're having today. 4, the ability to electronically file with US state regulators has been widely permissible for forms and rates, but it is not as common to be permissible for financial, tax, and corporate governance filings. We don't see why electronic signatures could not be permitted for these documents going forward as well. And finally, 5th, biographical affidavits typically require wet signatures and notarization, physical notarization, with a hard copy to be delivered by mail in the US. Going forward, online notarization, electronic signatures, and e-delivery would be helpful.
So what needs to be done from a regulatory perspective to make this to make the insurance more conducive to digitalization?
Yeah, that's a good question.
What is needed to do?
I think that insurers and regulators in the US and in other markets need to step back and look at the measures that were implemented and then have a discussion about what has the effect been. Has this measure, the ones that I just mentioned, has this measure made it easier for insurers to serve customers? And then importantly, have there been any negative implications of these measures? Did consumers find that they were unable to receive documents? Was there some consumer treatment issue? Was there some prudential issue? If the answer to the first question is that it did make insurance processes more efficient, and if those temporary measures did not result in bad outcomes for consumers or prudential outcomes, then I think those measures should be made permanent. And that's going to require some communication between insurers and regulators. But I think that taking the lessons from this pandemic will make the insurance industry stronger and make us better able to serve customers in a way that customers want to be served going forward through digitalization.
Okay. I have a question for Mr. Polshaw. The trend in the new service model and the digitalization, do you think it can continue? And how do we deal with the persons that are not covered with digitalization? How to do with that? We have the tendency to digitalization, but we have the other portion of people that are not digitalized. Question for Mr. Polshaw. But you can answer Mr. Shimshak.
Yes, thanks a lot. Do you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay, very good. So this is actually one of the crucial questions that we are currently dealing with. If you look at the impact of the pandemic and COVID, this is what we've seen is there's really an increase in demand of digital channels, and actually there's a lot happening so that we can, really cater for this demand. And what is also happening is that actually people are getting more used to it, and as they're getting more used to it, and the pandemic is now here for more than a year, I think this is also a permanent change. It will not go away again because people just jumped a little bit above this hurdle that prevented them before. However, if you look at the entire population, there is a significant increase of usage, but there will still be groups which will not use these channels. And there's actually a certain group who does it because they can't. If you look at if you are a traditional market leader, in Allianz Germany, we have people in our portfolio that are 90 and above. Yeah? So these are also people that we need to serve. This is the one group, but there's also a second group, which actually, and I can't really put a percentage to it, is who are increasingly unwilling to use digital channels because they are becoming so ubiquitous, because they fear that the data is not protected and so on. So, and this is probably one of the biggest questions, especially for the industry as such, and also the market leaders, because if you are a niche player, you can just, continue playing your niche game. You just say, I take on the customers who are willing to embark on the digital journey. But that's, of course, not a good, overall strategy from an industry perspective. And it is also not feasible if, as I said, you are a large incumbent serving larger parts of the population. As of now, I don't see the one answer. There are several answers. So what we are, for example, doing is investing a lot in making, the interactions, of course, easy, investing in UX design, not just the technology, but the usage of the technology. Then secondly, we're also looking on how to actually digitalize analog channels. So we still get a lot of paper because we get a lot of invoices from doctors or from a lot of different providers. So we're using, state-of-the-art technology to translate those into digital formats. So we can apply these processes to them. And then, of course, yes.
Yes, if we take the digitalization from the other side, companies, their employees are in remote work mode. Okay.
Yes.
What about the employer brand? How do we deal with that?
this is also the interesting. First of all, we have a lot of positive effects. In Allianz Germany, I think we had up to 90% of people working from home, so 90. So almost everybody was working from home, and it worked extremely well. And that actually, on a short term, increased the loyalty to our brand. All our employee surveys saw a jump during COVID. So people feel actually much more loyal at the moment. So in the short term to our company. The question is, how will it continue? Because at the end, going to the office and meeting your colleagues face to face, was a core element of creating your brand as an employer. And now people are sitting at home. So we are not yet clear how this long-term effort affects us. And again, I think here we will see a mixture. I think there are certain formats that are there to stay. So we will also continue to see, home office rates from, I would say, up to 30 to 40% to be also there for a long-term basis, but then also a return to the office and actually addressing more complex topics. Because what we saw is we are very good in, digitizing our work also when there's more standard processes, not a lot of conflict involved. But we reach a little bit the limits once we, want to deal with new topics, very complex topics where you need some real brainstorming, some real collaboration. There we see after a year that we somehow reach a threshold where you just need people in a room.
Well, I will give the same question to Mr. James Kent. Willis Re, employer brand, the same question, but I have other questions for you. What is your view on the role of digital to develop the risk transfer industry? And what has changed in the way you can interact with your clients? Mr. Kent.
Okay, thank you. Delighted to be here as well. So I'll follow on Danielle's commentary there in terms of the brand to start with. And I agree with what he says, that some of the changes are permanent, but the need to collaborate is the industry that we work in is all about innovating for our clients. And the human interaction that's needed for that is critical in an office environment. So I think you will find companies being far more flexible around remote working, but human beings are built to interact with each other. And I agree with Daniel's comments that we are going to see colleagues coming back to the office working on complex matters, but companies being more flexible around lifestyles and the way that we manage office and remote working together. I find it extraordinary that essentially the world shut down a year ago and the insurance and reinsurance industry essentially carried on. I hate to think what it would be like 20 years ago.
How many of your employees are in remote work?
Right now,
in percentage?
Probably 95%, wow. Possibly more. The only offices that we have that are really open at the moment are in Asia, in Australia, in China, in Tokyo, and that is about it. So in Willis Re, we have 2,200 employees. I would think all but about 100 are working remotely right now, and have done for a year. And while I think many colleagues have missed the interaction with ourselves, the ability to travel. This time last year, I was with you in Casablanca. It was a memorable trip. I loved being down there. But the fact of the matter is that we have operated without too much change to our service in terms of the delivery of the product. With 95% of our colleagues worked home, and one of my colleagues came up with a great phrase that the world is our desk. So while we're operating on this basis, while we're not able to be together like this, we're able to share a remote platform. So I agree with a lot of Daniel's comments, but it is amazing how resilient our industry has been.
What
just
about
in terms of
risk transfer industry? My question.
So in terms of how technology can help that, is that the question? Yeah. So
yes.
So in terms of how technology can play a role, we see that tech is able to distribute insurance everywhere. So essentially reaching the unreachable, which mirrors some of the comments before me. A good example would be a company that we work with that designs, builds, operates, and innovates insurance solutions that enable financial inclusion and address the protection gap in emerging markets. And they do this by partnering with mobile operators, with banks, with insurance companies, and various financial institutions, delivering simple and affordable insurance cover through the use of a mobile phone. And approximately 50% of the adult population around the world has a mobile phone. So distribution is one point, enhancing the customer experience, which in a simple way is about changing the way a business interacts with its customers and how those businesses provide those customers with a consistent experience whenever and wherever they need it. I think it's fair to say that society these days is quite a demanding and it has many options, and consequently those companies that don't interact with its customers in providing that consistent experience, the ability for customers to shop around is there. And then actually, why do people buy insurance? Why do companies buy insurance? It's to pay claims when needed, and technology has played a huge part in the customer experience in terms of insurance payouts.
But there is a matter.
Sorry, please.
There's the issue of interaction with customers. I mean, in the classic way, you have someone who comes to the company, wants to buy insurance, he have explanations. Let's say he's kind of insured to hear what the seller is saying. No, with the digital, maybe you have chats, you have robo chats, but you have no one in face of you.
Yeah.
How does it change?
Well, it's interesting you raised that point, because if you think of the US as a very advanced insurance geography, in fact, an awful lot of homeowners and auto insurance in the US is distributed through agents. I believe the number is 80%, and that is done, as you say, a lot of that is done through face-to-face interaction. So we think of the US as an advanced geography, but in fact, a lot of that is done through the agency distribution that relies face-to-face. But I do think, if the younger generation are comfortable growing up interacting on a platform like this, where you're not in the same room as that person, but you are interacting via technology. And it's interesting, when we went to lockdown back in March 2020, a lot of phone calls were still done through Skype and through the mobile phone. People were uncomfortable turning on the video and talking as if they were in the same room. And a year on, I think the way the industry has evolved is it is very rare now that I do a phone call without it being on a face-to-face basis.
So you're saying that the new generation is more comfortable with that, but still, they do need someone to speak to.
You have to still have that human interaction. I agree. Old men like me are slowly catching up with technology, but my children, they're very comfortable with this type of technology.
Yes. I give the same question to Mr. Vial et Monsieur Jourdan. Alors, justement, cette interaction avec les consommateurs.
Rightly so, this interaction with the consumer, and you have a lot of agencies who've closed under the Société Générale. How do we sell insurance? Through digital. And how did the digital impact you? One of you, please. Laurent. Hello. Je vais le faire en anglais. Je suis très heureux d'être.
My colleague Philippe. We have an experience in France that's fully digital. It's with Boursorama Bank, which is part of Société Générale. And we've actually realized that customers, even though they are really happy with banking, online banking, and they don't need interactions with people, still they requested for interactions with people. So if you consider online sales, it's only 10% of overall sales, fully digital online, so no interaction. But then if you add telephone, you go to 30, 40, and then you increase. So we don't really oppose digital and telephone or physical. It happens that when we combine both, we get more transformation and we get 3 to 5 times more clients going to the end of the subscription path. So it's hard to understand why they do that, but still that's what we really measure in France, for instance. Philippe, please, on your experience.
Yes, in Morocco, I think that smartphone application associated with phoning access seems to be the best way and the best mix to reach population without discrimination, because our subject is also about inclusion, and especially for areas not covered by banking networks or brokers, for example. So I think that the customers appreciate to get access to personalized online advices through the telephone, okay? And why not in the future through video application? Because YouTube and WhatsApp are the most popular apps here in Morocco, because people, the rate of a smartphone is very, very high in Morocco. And people are really very convenient with this kind of application.
So you think that a combination of interaction and digitalization can be the good way to start with this digital tendency?
Yes, sure. And it depends. It depends on the type of transaction and type of customers at the same time. We have to be very, very humble about what will happen really. And as Steve mentioned just before, it's very important to measure. And the crisis gave us great opportunity to test the customer behavior towards these new relation modes. The regulator gave us the opportunity, okay? And for example, in La Morocandie, we noticed that our customers reacted differently to the opening of urgent email online services during the crisis, depending on the type of customers and the type of transaction as well. For example, patrimonial clients who already have a digital culture, a practice of the product, and a good level of confidence in our institution, La Morocandie, they use the digital channel as more than 90%. And during the confinement and after the confinement as well. So we can be almost sure that if the regulator give us the opportunity to continue with this type of transaction, online transaction, we will have a lot of customers who will be very happy to continue. On the other hand,
according to you, I will let you go on, but according to you, what is the best time for human interaction, pre-sale or transformation?
Well, for online is probably
transformation at the end.
Transformation, not transformation, because of the regulatory constraint, and it depends on the countries also. So it's very clear that as it was said yesterday, the regulator has really a lot of things to do. As Serap Gonulal said yesterday for the World Bank. The insurance regulator, they have really to work with the association, the insurance association, to ease the capacity of online transactions, which is not really the case currently in Morocco in the text, I would say. But after sale is potentially much easier for the customer, because the sale was done, and just after the confidence is there, and we can probably develop some specific online transaction for after sales.
So the pre-sale time is the best for human interaction for confidence.
Yeah. to set up the confidence.
Is the digital, is it a booster for inclusion?
Yes, it does, but that's not enough. Basically, what we've seen is that with the crisis and the pandemics, customers looked for usage-based insurance. So, for instance, you are locked down, you don't run your car anymore because you don't go to work with your car anymore. So you want to pay less premium based on usage of your car. And we have increased demand for this, 3 times or 5 times increased demand for this. You just need to send a picture of your mileage, the mileage screen of your car, and then you pay less premium. So that's something they want. I would call it value for money. It's not only being digital, it's paying for what you need in terms of crisis.
This is what
we've seen that for.
So, someone talked about it in the previous roundtable we had, and said consumers, the need for insurance is here today with COVID and with the pandemic. And he said we need less complex insurance to be more inclusive, less complex products, simple, readable products that basic consumer can understand, and more tailored. And that is a way to digitalize also. What is your take on that? I'd like to hear the 5 of you about this. Mr. Kent, please.
So I think that's exactly right. It comes back to the comment I made earlier that we have a relatively demanding and expectant society these days that want instant gratification. And I think the example just given on the user-based insurance is exactly the right thing. You know, people will buy insurance providing they see value in it. And if you are a low user of a car, or you know, for your travel insurance, you know, and you need it tailored to your individual needs, technology is going to help drive the underwriting that supports that. You know, with the technology that not there before, you would underwrite on a portfolio basis, but technology allows you to drill down and create tailored insurance products based on the individual. And that's a very powerful thing.
And simpler.
Absolutely. Absolutely simple. And in theory, more cost effective as well, because, you know, the less human hands that touch an insurance transaction, the less expense associated with it, the greater speed. So it all comes back to that customer experience. And you know, whenever you are buying something, not insurance, but you go to a shop to buy something, you buy food that you want to consume. You don't buy something general. And insurance is moving, technology is allowing insurance to move down that same road.
Mr. Simjak?
Yeah, I agree with James. I think that's exactly right. I mean, I think when I think back to my own experience of buying insurance for my home here in Washington, D.C., you know, I went online and I started searching for insurers, and I put in condominium insurance, and you know, on Google, 12 different came up. And then there's 12 options. So my first step to make cuts from those 12 to make it a smaller number was I went through and I looked at what's the process here, what's the underwriting process, what's the sales process online, and I was able to cut out, you know, half of them just based on that, because it was a clunky, old-fashioned system that wasn't very customizable. And then price came in, of course, but you know, ultimately the one I went with was extremely customizable, very simple to understand. I mean, literally, when I was looking at the application process, on the screen of my computer, there was a spectrum, and I could move it back and forth. How much coverage do you want? Do you want, you know, $100 worth of coverage, all the way up to, do you want $3 million worth of coverage? And that was so simple. That was for all the different types of coverages. So it was very customizable, very easy to understand, and a fast process as well.
Do you think that we can have like a supermarket of insurance? You go and you have insurance on shelves with prices.
Well, that would be the opposite of digitalization, though, if we had to go in person. But
no, not in person. I mean on the internet. A general store of insurance.
There are certainly companies that have tried that online. Yeah, so that's possible. Yeah.
Mr. Polcho?
I think it nails down to a very simple formula. Simplification is the precondition for successful digitalization, because only if you simplify products, you will create a user experience and a process that really is convenient for the customer, takes the customer along. Having said that, there's one thing I wanted to comment on customer behavior, on when they go digital and when not. I'm not sure that the real question is about the process, but actually how emotional a topic or a subject is. If I look, for example, in claims, if you have a simple, glass claim, you want to have it as simple as possible. Maybe just take a photo, send it in, get reimbursed, that's it. If you have an accident, where people got hurt or yourself got hurt, you are completely unclear what does that mean in terms of also liability, personal liability, and so on. You want to talk to people. The same is, when you sell in the sales process, very simple stuff, your second car, no fancy model, just have it online. But if it's more complex, and maybe an old time or whatever, you want to probably talk to people. So I think, having the simplification, but also dealing with, hybrid customer behavior, I would call it hybrid customer behavior, that's going to be the challenge.
Thank you. We have 5 minutes left, and I want to give you a question that is out of the boundaries of this panel, but a question of consumer. We had a question from the audience. Are there risks that are just uninsurable? And I want the answer of each one of you. What risks are just uninsurable? Briefly.
I'm happy to start. The most obvious one now is pandemic risks, as we're seeing from the COVID-19 crisis. The scope of the losses from the pandemic, the geographic dispersion of the losses, and the unclear timeline for the losses as well make pandemic risk uninsurable.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I would agree. The only thing I would challenge there, and I think Steve's right, the scale of the pandemic loss is running into potentially trillions of dollars of insured losses. There is not enough capital in our industry to support that. But I do believe the industry has a role to play, and it's that hybrid role between private risk and state or government risk. And the industry has a role to play in helping understand risk, model risk, and hedge risk, because there is trillions of dollars of capital out there looking for home, providing they can understand what the risk is, and providing they believe there is a return on that risk. But I think Steve's right. I would add cyber. Cyber is an event that knows no geographic boundaries. It knows no classes of business boundaries. The whole point about an insurance portfolio is diversification allows you to take large individual losses, but not losses across the entirety of the portfolio. And the thing about pandemic, and the thing that a major global cyber event would do, is it impacts the asset side of the balance sheet as well. So it's that black swan event. And then I would put terrorism, particularly nuclear, of a scale in that as well. The industry cannot afford to take those risks alone.
Mr. Vial or Jourdan?
Cyber is definitely a challenge. I'm not an underwriter for these types of risks, so I'll be humble, but cyber is definitely a challenge, because can you imagine a whole administration or country or being suddenly shut off or disturbed? I'm not sure that can be insurable per se as of now.
Let's go for cyber. Mr. Jourdan.
Yeah, about cyber, again, I cannot imagine the whole country being blocked let's say all the administrations, for instance, maybe some public companies, that would be definitely expensive to insure, I guess.
And Mr. Vial?
I think I have nothing to add. Pandemic,
cyber, terrorism, nuclear.
And cyber, for sure. Even if we have a role to play, I agree. Yeah, if we have a role to play, and we played a role in Morocco concerning health coverage, for example, because it was for individuals, and we took the risk that. And hopefully, it was okay to take this kind of risk in Morocco, because thanks to the administration at the moment, the pandemic was really very, very well managed. But we did the job to be, with our private customers during this pandemic.
Very expensive. Mr. Pulcho, quickly.
I would say we always have a challenge when we have rapid systemic change, because our models are built on the past, and when we have a systemic change, our models come to a limit. And right now, I'm more concerned about geopolitical developments and how, and if they have there a potential for rapid systemic change where we cannot adjust quickly enough our models.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, gentlemen. And on behalf of the Federation, I will extend the invitation to the next year edition. And then thank you for your contribution.
Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Merci, messieurs, dames. On reprend après la...
Thank you, gentlemen. We're going to be resuming after the break.
De Casablanca de l'assurance, un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance.
Welcome to the Casablanca Insurance Meeting, a new format, a collective and innovative approach, an international scene. Welcome to a world of innovation and expertise around the insurance and reinsurance businesses.
Malgré toutes nos différences, il y a tellement de choses qui nous rapprochent. Comme la passion qui nous unit d'une même voix, ou quelques mots qui, sans parler, disent tout. Quand la confiance est là, compter ne compte plus. Mais quand la bienveillance est là, c'est tout ce qui compte. Un coup de main se manifeste en un coup d'œil, et peu importe le contretemps, il arrive toujours à temps. Parce que plus on se rapproche, plus la vie devient facile. Aujourd'hui, Atlanta et Sanad s'unissent pour que l'assurance soit plus simple et toujours plus proche de vous.
Atlanta Sanad Assurance, la vie nous rapproche.
Bienvenue dans le rendez-vous de Casablanca de l'assurance. Un format inédit, une approche collective et innovante, une scène internationale. Bienvenue dans un univers d'innovation et d'expertise autour des métiers de l'assurance et de la réassurance. distance, ce que la pandémie nous a appris. La vente à distance, ce que la pandémie nous a appris.
Bonjour à tous.
Good morning, everyone. Now we're going to be proposing a virtual roundtable to describe in less than half hour a distance sales with the managing director of the Treasury and other key partners. In less than a minute, if I may, I'd like to ask them to please introduce themselves, even if you do know their outstanding journey and professional experience. So I have the honor to chair this table at a round table. So we're going to be around 3 points, the AID parameter, its regulatory scope and challenges. But let's start with its definition. So good evening. I know this is not the best timing to do on this roundtable, but let's try to be dynamic. And it is a very interesting roundtable and passionating. Let's start with Sébastien Sédot and Patrick Raffort. The parameter definition, can you describe very briefly? Please introduce yourself first, but can you please describe the parameter of distance sales and give us a right definition? Let's start with Sébastien or Patrick. Oh, Patrick, please, whoever wants to start. Well, Sébastien, please start. Okay, I'll take the floor in first. So thank you very much. Thank you, dear Michelle, for your presentation. I am the chief editor and delegate of the Insurance Magazine, which is the key media of the insurance sector in France. And I'd like to take this opportunity to thank the organizers for the Casablanca Insurance Meeting for having organized remotely this great event. On a topic that from March 20 to 21, it has become in the spotlight. So this theme have been followed by all of us very closely on the Argus. Distance sales has been a hot topic since the very beginning. So we have been able to measure all the interests and stakes of distance sales for all the stakeholders, and the impulse that distance sales have given to all of us. And how do we define distance sales and what its parameter? I will spare you the article of 2021 and 20 of the Consumption Code, but according to our interpretation or definition, it's not a legal one or regulatory one, but distance sales is primarily marketing of insurance products that are sold and marketed remotely without the physical presence of the insurer, the consumer, or the insured. So this distance sales or this mechanism and instruments required several remote modes, telephone, video conferences, through Teams, WebEx, and all other tools that you know. It's a distribution marketing channel that is quite popular. And it gives like a remote type of sales or correspondence type of sales. So this is pretty much the first definition that is quite obvious and down to earth. So as journalists, we have several questions that come to our minds. So where does the distance sales starts and stops? So when you look at the insurance sector in France and in other countries, the underwriting journey is like a kind of a journey. Does it start remotely? Does it start? I am in VAD, or is it a sales marketing? So what are the borders, actually? And we need to adapt to the new distance sales, namely on some products like life insurance. This is a product that has a reputation to be sold easily, but it requires a face-to-face. And we have seen that for 2020, there has a drop in life insurance because a lot of agencies and life insurers have it closed down. And also, is it about contracts to define distance sales? Is it about agents and the client? Is it already known by the distributor? Is he already in a portfolio? Can we actually conclude a new contract by telephone? Is it really distance sales? So we might ask all these questions. And I will close with the following question on the definition. So there is not a single distance sales, but there are three ways to conduct distance sales: through distribution, and what we call the lead and the show prospect. For instance, a visitor that will fill in and log in to fill in a form, an insurance form online, and he's going to be called later on. I think this practice is not a question, but the second mode is the natural activity of the insurer and the distributor as a business as usual in their portfolio and loyalty practice. And this practice is not under the spotlight and not very popular. And another aspect that is more problematic today, and I will let some room for other participants to answer, is the market consumers that we would attract without them really expressing the eagerness to be on the market or to have insurance systems. But the practices are not always that compliant sometimes. So thank you very much, Sébastien. Patrick Raffort, can you introduce yourself and tell us, for you, what is this definition parameter of the distance sales? Thank you very much. Thank you for allowing me to be even remotely in attendance with you. I'd like to greet our friends of the Moroccan Insurance and Reinsurance Federation. The definition that Sébastien had just made is quite good and very large and broad. In this field, as in other fields, we need to understand what are the stakes in terms of data, figures, parameters, etc. And we have seen that we have some hard time to limit or to figure out where it starts and where it stops. The principle that my colleague highlighted is that we have some non-competition rules and also communication tools are standardized: telephone, video conference, etc., mobile telephone, and distance sales on the mobile phones, what we call the AM trade or marketing, in most countries account for almost 20% of communication tools. So coming back onto parameters, and that was a question asked before, on distance sales in a broader way, world figures, and this will allow you to better benchmark at global level. In 2016, we were $1 billion of turnover and benefit. In 2020, $290 billion. So we have seen that with the sanitary crisis, it has an immense, tremendous boost. We would have most probably $350 billion in terms of turnover. So in Europe, in 2019, we were at about 236 billion euros, with an increase rate that was quite significant of about 14%. And in 2020, the figures have just been shared. We will be around 720 billion euros in terms of turnover. In France, the national figures and data give us a quite precision and accuracy on figures, 130 billion euros. with an increase rate of 5%. And if we make a distinction between goods and services, we see that goods and assets have increased by 3%, services dropped by 5%, and on services, on travels and stays, we have a drop of about 50 to 60%. So what about insurance in all this landscape? Looking at all the literature that we can find out there, well, in the insurance market or affinity market, it is a very complicated sector to really come up with exact figures. Same with the distance sales. Looking at the figures we have and looking thoroughly on the marketing process and sales process that we have on the dashboard, we can consider that on the insurance part, we have about 14 billion euros that are not reported on the national figures. This is not e-commerce. Of course, we need to make a distinction between e-commerce with shots on the web and all the contractual relationships that are formalized and are not accounted for in the turnover of e-commerce. Now, we can say that we are in the field of insurance of at about 14 to 15 billion. And maybe we can consider that the borrower or the relationship between consumer and the borrower, even if there is a banking relationship, the relationship with the insurance is remote. The client will receive a proposition that has been maybe increased. And if he agrees, maybe he sends back some forms that have been properly filled in. And he can actually recourse to electronic signing. What Sébastien said earlier on, we are properly on distance sailing and sales, and we can bring into this category the figures I referred to earlier. And of course, there is a solicitation, but the conclusion or the agreement is not done with physical presence, but with electronic signature. And to close with, all distance sales that are done by telephone are under discussion and can be questioned sometimes. Thank you very much, Mr. Raffort. And I will in turn thank the Moroccan Federation of Insurance and Reinsurance. And I am so unhappy. Oh, it's a shame I'm not in Casablanca this time as we were in 2019. So can we now shift to the regulatory aspect before giving the floor to UNECOR? Can you actually describe us the regulatory limitations and constraints of distance sales, and what are the legal scope of enforcement? Thank you, Michael. Good evening to all of you. Good afternoon. I am from the BLB Consulting Office, which is a consulting office that assists insurance companies and brokers to help them to be compliant with the legislation and regulations. And Patrick spoke about FG2A. He is president of the FG2A, and I'd like to make his presentation and introduce him. Is the Federation of Insurance and Guarantees, bringing together 200 members in France. And to summarize in a couple of minutes the regulation of distance sales, it is very much complicated because much has been written about it in the newspapers. So we spoke about it over the last years, but we have the feeling that the situation is crystallized. So there's a lot of evolution and progress over the last years from the regulatory frameworks. So regulators have worked hard to set up the legal frameworks. But if we go back to the very start of distance sales, we see that there has been a progress from the legal standpoint. But the theme of this roundtable is the post-COVID time. It is interesting to see that COVID has allowed to make distance sales more credible. As before, associations and many other federations would challenge distances because there have had been some abuses, because distances in the insurance has been done regularly and progressively since last year, inspired by what was done in the past. And the most veterans of us will remember the door-to-door kind of sales for insurance contract signing. So this door-to-door has become virtual through call centers that used to be localized in France, but now it's also overseas. So over the last 15 years, the regulation has gone harder and tighter for the right reasons, by the way. And the purpose was to make sure not to hinder distance sales and allow the freedom to go for a contract. But COVID has allowed for remote or distance sales, but it has to remain possible after COVID. Now, going back to your question, and as Sébastien said earlier, I'm not going to go through all the articles of the code. It would be too burdenous for you. But in terms of clarification for the video's viewers of this roundtable, as you know, insurance brokers and intermediaries that want to distribute large products have to, according to the legislation, get a license with their countries or from their countries, from what we call the National Institute that will allow you to register on a red list that will allow not to be called on cold or overnight from whatever activity. So for our viewers today, and who do not want to be solicited or requested, and you could go on the website, log in your telephone or fixed number, and we cannot call you because the insurance and company or broker has to get the license that will allow him to filter all the telephone numbers that he wishes to call, and this phone number that will be out or that will be listed as possible, available, and not on the red list, then the insurance company can reach out and contact that client. So that's the first filter that will allow the consumer not to be contacted or solicited. Of course, the legislator and regulators have allowed for the last week to reduce this possibility, because brokers have found the cost of the licenses or accreditations way too high. So now they're trying to make sure that all brokers who want to do distance sales need to do it with compliance with the standards, but with realistic costs. So sanctions are quite high if we go to contact a client without the red filters. So, but anyways, this, once it's done, most of the problems that we have seen on distance sales in France are what we call the cold calls. So now for now, we have some people who have not been solicited or requested to go for insurance. But once we have gone through what we call the institute or hotel procedure, then the insurance company will call the consumer, and by law, it has to go through the tunnel, the underwriting tunnel. There are a lot of compulsory provisions and mentions that have to be well understood and make sure that the prospect and the consumer is duly informed on all this information and provided with all the details and different possibilities. So there are a lot of legal mentions and information that has to be said and shared. And now, of course, when the calls are recorded, and the law will compel to keep the recording, to keep the recording for 2 years. The recording needs to be kept for 2 years. So all this information needs to be given to consumer beforehand and for by the prospect consumer. After this channel or underwriting channel, we move to the agreement for an insurance contract, not that the person or consumer has solicited, but he will have been presented and offered. So that agreement or contract has to be done upon joint agreement since last July, and there's a new law under discussion that will be finalized in a couple of weeks, and the enforcement decree are expected by the summer to make sure that these sales is done into time. So we'll not be able to sell to a prospect overnight or cold selling to the consumer without actually recording for 24 hours the call. So the first call will have to give all the information to the consumer on the legal and all the products, on the legal aspects and all the legal, and the consumer will keep that information. He will be sent that information in PDF format, and once he gives his consent on agreement, he will have to sign the agreement or the contract by electronic signature. Thank you. I said in the very beginning that I was the keeper of time. I'm the Swiss watch here. I know that the regulatory explanations will be very lengthy. Well, I tried very hard to summarize and make it very brief without dwelling on the legal articles. But in a couple of words, few words, we have gone very far on distance sales, and now we are at a point where the market is well regulated, and we are tooled to make sure that operators comply both with and respect both the right of consumers, but also the right of underwriting remotely. And we have seen that during COVID, this is a very pertinent and very good tool. Thank you very much. Professor, can you tell us about the risks and opportunities and make your introduction, please? Thank you. So, Maître Lapointe, you have given him a mission impossible here to make a legal presentation in 20 minutes, or 2 minutes rather. He's done brilliantly. Well, I'm faced with the same mission impossible than my colleague, but I'm in charge of regulation of the insurance for the Treasury. It's the setting up of 2 rules and proposing law and draft laws and regulatory texts. There are quite many of them in the insurance sector, as well as the distribution of the insurance products. So this is also part of it. So in other words, this is the legal aspect is something that I do. These are my prerogatives. So the main risks going from, or rather talk about opportunities. Distance sales needs to be, well, as it is, a communication tool. And we have different channels, telephone, video conferencing, and the increasing use of distant mobiles and internet. But this should not be synonymous of a kind of degraded sales. And it could be slippery if we do not use the tools properly and with high standards. And we have seen this during the early COVID times. We've had some degraded use of distance sales. On the use of distance and remote sales sometimes should drag along the adaptation of professionals and operations and operators, and even adapt the regulatory framework in order to protect the consumers, because sometimes at European level, the law has been increasingly in favor of consumers, both for internet sales on physical or e-commerce, whatever. These principles are absolutely a consensus between all EU countries and make sure that consumers are making the right and enlightened choice in all duty and moral conscience. Now, about the risks, in many cases, it is a consistent risk. And Maître Lapointe has said it. There has been some deviations, and it's still going on right now. There are some abuses, or rather situations that haven't been really compliant with the regulations and the laws. So the regulation has adapted and is continuing to do so. And the crystallization that we look forward to, hopefully the situation in the field will be crystallized and will vanish and properly managed. So as our responsibility as regulator is that the rules will hinder and prevent fraud and deviations. So, of course, there is the contractual and underwriting freedom, but we need to protect the consumers on his free choices. But what about the new challenges? I was talking about the problems. I have just surrounded them. I've just but I don't. This is outspoken, actually. But in practice, there is a degradation of subjects. So, well, let's say that distance sales is not very professional. It actually complies with the regulation, but not really. So we have not adapted fully to this very unique distance sales. So we're not really very straightforward. And sometimes we go beyond the rules and standards. We are not seeking to comply and respect the laws and the consumers' rights. And sometimes there are really organized fraud, and distance sales they allows for that and efficient ways to actually fraud people. And problem touches the contractual information. So to what extent the contractual information is disclosed to the client under the right conditions and sound conditions before, during, and after the signing of the contract, and also the consent. To what extent we have an enlightened consent and agreement. We're talking about insurance schemes here and products. It is a very complex product, isn't it? And by way of construction, really taking care of the quality of consent is a real issue in general, but in more particularly in the insurance sector. And this is what we are doing in our department. The CPR, Prudential and Regulation National Authority, that has worked extensively on the consumers' protection, and the DGCCR, which is the service department under the Ministry of Economy and Finance, that is charge of the general control on the way things are sold in France, particularly in the insurance sector and particularly in distance sales. So there is a some of things and degradation of things. For instance, an email is sent with an internet link that gives access to documents. That is not enough. So we want to make sure that when people want their contract, they need to be able to have access to the right documents, and we need them to have the chance to read fully and understand. We have seen in a couple of months some people, namely restaurant owners, not to have opened their insurance contracts and not having read it fully, which is quite confusing. And in other words, we want to make sure that people have the document, take the chance to read it and time to read it. We don't want to challenge people and bother them, but it is important. So in terms of consent, there's a moral consent. Yes, why not? We need to make sure that consent is done on the terms of the contract and keep a trace. A word on opportunities. Could you please conclude on the opportunities? Data that have been shown show the momentum and dynamics and provide us clear evidence of a need and tangible opportunities. So we are finding out this new things because these new schemes, and we have seen that there are new means to do better what we did not used to do well on the telephone. So tools are growing, are being designed. So the awareness and stream of awareness is growing, and the crisis is a good opportunity for that. So there are clear opportunities of development out there, but these development opportunities ahead of us will depend on our collective capacities and professional capabilities as public powers to make sure that the regulation and the consumer's protection is not only a wishful thinking on a regulation obstacle, but a real tangible practice in the field, regardless of the sales mode, whether irrespective of distance sales or not, and irrespective of the volumes of the sales. Thank you very much. So this is a new challenge of the sector in its daily marketing and promotion. Last part, as Niolen was saying, on challenges and opportunities.
So what we can say about this pandemic and the post-crisis phase is to see the radical change in behavior. We can see that a certain number of consumers have truly turned to e-commerce, to the internet, and to this remote relationship because they didn't have a choice. So the conclusions we can draw from all of this is that there's a major environmental and societal change, and there's another way of addressing the relationship and explicit demand. So the studies that we have produced, or those that we've been able to observe, whether they are French, European, or even international, have all revealed the same thing. They all reveal that they want to continue tapping into the internet, and they have realized that this mode of consumption, of interaction with providers and of goods or services is interesting, and they do wish to pursue that. So marketplaces and e-commerce and this distance relationship will continue. They also wish to have greater proximity with local trade, and so this is where you see a convergence of the marketplace with the more involvement of local trade, which includes agencies or branches and banks, etc. We also see as they need full digital services, which to date, I mean, the insurance segment business is lagging behind. I mean, we weren't necessarily in a full digital mode from the beginning to the end. And so today they wish to see this full digital approach, whether it is in the underwriting process or even for advisory. And Victor was talking about this. It's important to be increasingly present in the advisory phase. What's also important is transparency and seamlessness, but also the indemnification of claims. So this seamlessness needs to be available on end-to-end basis, and it's important for things to be transparent in terms of engagements. So we only have a few minutes left. So Sebastian, for you, so these new challenges, how would you describe them? So just in a nutshell. I think there is room for ethical, professional, and sustainable distance selling. For example, it's important to have this ethical, professional approach, and unfortunately, this is maybe where things were lagging behind. And we must nevertheless say that market professionals have shown good faith. So now the current legislation with the brokerage legal framework that has also been adapted, and now what remains to be seen is whether this is something that will truly be implemented, and we will see how long it will take for this everything to unfold. Well, we should also wonder whether there was maybe things were maybe a little too hasty. But maybe one of the answers to the challenge will lie in the strengthening of the oversight of the CTA. On the one hand, maybe the CPA needs to continue to strengthen this oversight of these telephone platforms that aren't necessarily hosted or in France. And so it's important to make sure that that all of the specifications, the regulatory specifications, are met. There's also the strengthening of the DGCRF and the sanctions, and this is something we've also discussed this year. These are a lot more stringent in terms of fines, and there's also the Blocktail registration, and so this is something that was raised by Benoit. If I understood correctly, the government has made an effort on the cost of this membership for intermediaries, but as far as local brokerage, there has also been some progress made, and there's also this co-responsibility throughout the entire value chain, including the final distributor. And so, to conclude, we will give the floor to Lionel Cork, who will give us his version. But so, what would you say about this? What does distance selling provide to this insurance landscape? So, distance selling is an ancillary tool that has been introduced over the recent years, and people today are used to working remotely, to consume remotely, and they will increasingly get used to purchasing remotely. So distance selling is the tool for the future. And in fact, I would like to thank the public authorities for not having prohibited distance selling, because these distance selling was supposed to be prohibited for insurance. And so thankfully, this is something that's very properly supervised. And however, today, the legislative rule of law allows supervisor, the market regulators, and market operators to ensure that these deviants, or to ensure that no deviants can cause damage. And so, to paraphrase the President Macron, it would be too bad to prevent the freedom of the majority to allow the minority to prevail. Lionel Cork, so what's the future for distance selling, according to you? So it seems that there's a bright future ahead, given what we are experiencing today. So what this landscape allowed us to see to realize two things. So I'm not sure that the outlook is the same for the different types of distance selling and how things will unfold, given the risks and challenges that we raised earlier. So this will depend on how things will unfold on the ground and the reaction of the public authorities. If we see, for example, a phone soliciting and insurance, I'm not sure if there's a real bright future for telephone soliciting or phone marketing. And in fact, that's what Maître Lapointe was saying. This question that was raised is the prohibition of prospecting or phone telemarketing. And so the legislator chose, for example, to focus on energy. There were some prohibitions following some deviations, and so there was an attempt by the legislator, and so we do have a more balanced framework which aims to set a real framework. I'm not sure whether the public authorities are hasty to push things forward in this regard, given that we're already taking stock of this CCF, and we have already seen some attempts at embezzlement where sometimes there have been attempts to make sales of completely useless policies. And so this is a reality on the ground. I mean, we must admit that. And so if these types of practices, including with the new regulation that holds these people accountable, or rather fails to hold these people accountable, where everyone needs to take on their responsibilities, we have regulatory bodies that need to exercise their oversight, and we need to ensure that consumers aren't jeopardized and their interests aren't jeopardized. and the administration and the regulatory authorities all need to be held accountable, and rules need to be put in place that leave no room for abuse. So the future of telemarketing will truly depend on the way that things will be enforced, on the new tools that are provided to the supervisory authorities to be able to do their work, especially the recording of phone conversations, which was not necessarily done in the past. And this is what will dictate the future of these activities. And final point, and this references what Maître Lapointe was saying, these activities have repercussions on each other. I mean, we've had extensive debates at the Senate on the exact scope of the regulation on telemarketing. And so typically, based on the way that things could be said, it could go well beyond this telemarketing. This is the risk at hand. Not only those that will be involved in telemarketing will be on the poor end of the regulation, but generally will end up jeopardizing other telemarketing or distance selling activities that have nothing to do with these practices. And so these are the stakes that are, and so the future will truly depend on the professionals. So I didn't want to interrupt you because I would have loved to be able to continue this conversation. So I'd like to thank you all, but before maybe just one final word to conclude. Just one word. Lionel? So what would you say distance selling is? Patrick's. I would say that is an incredible tool for the future. Thank you, Sebastian. It's a tool for professionals that should be used ethically. Maître Lapointe. I would say that it's a tool that has a great future ahead. And so we might have gone over for a few minutes, but we truly hope that we were able to shed some light on distance selling. We look forward to seeing you all next year in Casablanca for the Casablanca Insurance Meeting. So congratulations for this great organization. Thank you all.